Right, so how to make a government like that of Benjamin Netanyahu's even worse than it already is, with its excuses for continuing its atrocities in Gaza already being made and widely ridiculed. Well, letting yet another madman, something this government is in no shortage of already, back into government will probably do it. The return of Itamar Ben Gvir to the Israeli government and straight back into his post of security minister at that, all coinciding with the resumption of Israel's brutal attacks on Gaza, makes for yet another chilling escalation in the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. Ben Gvir is a far-right extremist and has long been a vocal advocate for the expulsion of Palestinians and the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, supported as he is by the far-right settler movement. His reinstatement to the government, alongside Benjamin Netanyahu's flimsy justifications for ending the ceasefire, underscores the depravity, criminality and moral bankruptcy of Israel's leadership. And he needn't just take my word for that, of course. Take Netanyahu's.
Hamas is responsible for this war. It invaded our towns, murdered our people, raped our women, and kidnapped our loved ones. Hamas refused offer after offer to release our hostages. In the past 2 weeks, Israel did not initiate any military action in the hope that Hamas would change course. Well, that didn't happen. While Israel accepted the offer of President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Hamas flatly refused to do so. And this is why I authorized yesterday the renewal of military action against Hamas. Israel does not target Palestinian civilians. We target Hamas terrorists. And when these terrorists embed themselves in civilian areas, when they use civilians as human shields, they're the ones who are responsible for all unintended casualties. Palestinian civilians should avoid any contact with Hamas terrorists. And I call on the people of Gaza, get out of harm's way, move to safer areas. Because every civilian casualty is a tragedy. And every civilian casualty is the fault of Hamas. I thank President Trump for his unwavering support for Israel. Our alliance with the United States has never been stronger. To those who criticize Israel, I ask, what would you do if terrorists murdered and kidnapped your children? You would do what we are doing. In the face of pure evil, free societies have no choice but to fight. So I want to assure all our friends around the world, Israel will fight and Israel will win. We will bring our people home and we will destroy Hamas. We will not relent until we achieve all these vital goals. And we will not rest until we give our country a future of peace, prosperity, and hope.
Right, so that was Benjamin Netanyahu there, getting his excuses in a televised statement given to the people of Israel and the world, frankly, because he's the English version, trying to convince us all that he was right and justified in what he was doing and why that was. Still under the impression that all of the Israel lobby propagandizing and the mainstream media headlines playing matters down in Israel and Gaza and the Hasbara that Israel heavily invests in was having an impact, despite all of us witnessing this most well-documented of all genocides ever, playing out in real time across social media, exposing the truth behind all of his lies. Hamas is responsible for a lot of things, but given that this conflict did not begin on October 7th, 2023, but could be traced back at least to 1967, when Israeli occupation of the occupied Palestinian territories began, and actually even further than that, back to 1948 to the Nakba, and the fact Hamas didn't come into existence until 1987, well, it just doesn't wash to people who know their onions and aren't being taken in by all the dishonest headlines. Hamas bears responsibility for October 7th, sure, and other attacks besides. But Israel had a role on October 7th too. We know this. You won't allow an investigation into that, though, an independent one, that is. So what is that if it really is all Hamas, in which case? Surely you would want the world to know that you are absolutely right, but you won't let them do that, will you? Why is that exactly? The question of rape is one where no cases in connection with that crime have arisen ever in relation to October 7th. Nobody has come forward with such accusations. Other crimes we only have your word for. So let's have an independent investigation then, because as much as you can point to the events of that one night, it is harder and harder for people to accept the following 15 months of genocide, now beginning again in Gaza, as a proportional response to that one night. So every crime you listed there is mirrored by tens of thousands of Palestinian fatalities at Israeli hands across the Gaza Strip, mostly of women and children. Hamas refused your demands to change the deal as per US interference. Hamas demanded you keep your word and move to phase 2 of the ceasefire as you had already agreed to, which would have seen the release of the hostages, the last of them. Over the last 2 weeks, where you say you have not initiated any military action, what you did, apart from lie there blatantly because the IDF were indeed attacking still, was to enact a 2-week-long siege of starvation of the Gaza Strip. And you did that in the hope that Hamas would give in to your abhorrence. You claim this is why you ended the ceasefire, but the truth is, we all knew at some point you would, because your government would fall apart unless you did. Your hard-right coalition partners would desert you and dump you out of power and at the mercy of the World Court and domestic courts on your charges of corruption, which of course you were due in court for on the very day you ended the ceasefire, weren't you? Netanyahu's rhetoric is particularly insidious because it frames Israel's aggression as a response to Palestinian violence, ignoring the root causes of the conflict all the way. The blockade of Gaza, and I'm not talking about the food and aid blockade that they have instigated for the last 2 weeks, is another instance of Israeli aggression because this one is now in its 18th year and has in itself created a humanitarian catastrophe well before the events of October 7th, with over 2 million people living in what has been described as an open-air prison. What has happened since has only made the situation all that much worse. The constant bombardment of Gaza, coupled with the destruction of infrastructure, healthcare facilities and schools, has left the population in a state of perpetual despair. To claim that Israel's actions are defensive is to ignore the systemic violence and oppression that define Israel's occupation of Palestine. The return of Itamar Ben Gvir to the Israeli government, though, is a grim reminder of the far-right's growing influence in Israeli politics. Ben Gvir has built his career on inciting violence against Palestinians and advocating for their expulsion from the occupied territories. His party, Jewish Power, or Otzma Yehudit, is a coalition of extremists who openly call for the annexation of the West Bank and the establishment of a Jewish supremacist state. This is literal white supremacy, all rolled up in a political party in Israel, headed by this nutter. Ben Gvir's reinstatement to government at this particular moment is certainly not necessary. His loss from government and that of his party didn't bring the government down. There isn't enough of them to do that. Therefore, his return is instead seen as something that is somewhat symbolic. It sends a clear message that Israel's leadership not only condones but actively encourages this genocide in Gaza. It keeps the likes of Bezalel Smotrich happy, Ben Gvir being his mate, and it does reinforce the strength of the government once again, in a small way, but also has rewarded Ben Gvir even as he left the coalition over that ceasefire, because he's walked straight back into his security minister role. The depravity of Ben Gvir and his party is further underscored by their history of incitement and violence. Ben Gvir has been photographed brandishing a gun in Palestinian neighbourhoods, has handed guns out to settlers like sweets, and has called for the execution of Palestinian hostages. Let's not call them prisoners when so many are held without charge. The whole reason for him to do that was to free up room in Israel's prisons. His rhetoric is not just inflammatory, it is a direct incitement to genocide. By bringing him back into the fold, back into government, Netanyahu is signalling that there are no red lines when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians. And of course we've seen the health and physical condition of those Palestinian hostages that have recently been released and know all about that, don't we? The resumption of Israel's assault on Gaza has had devastating consequences for the Palestinian population. According to the Cradle, Palestinians in Gaza are dying every minute as Israel intensifies its bombardment. The airstrikes have targeted residential buildings, hospitals and schools, leaving a trail of destruction and despair in their wake. The death toll continues to rise, with more than 400 Palestinians killed on the first day of the resumption of atrocities and thousands more injured besides. The impact of this violence is particularly acute for children, who make up nearly half of Gaza's population. Something that keeps getting forgotten or omitted in the media. Gaza has been called a graveyard for children, and not without good reason. Many have lost family members, homes and schools, have been left traumatised and without any hope for the future once again. And now we hear of a renewed plan to ground invasion of Gaza, threatening to escalate the violence even further. A ground invasion would likely result in even higher casualties, mostly civilian, despite Netanyahu's protestations that they don't target civilians, showing so much of what the IDF has been doing in Gaza before, and will do again, is not so much a military operation, but more just an out-and-out massacre. Of course, the timing of all of this has to be taken in the broader political context of Israel as well. Particular note here, of course, is that Benjamin Netanyahu is currently on trial for corruption, facing charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu has used every tool at his disposal to delay proceedings and maintain his grip on power. COVID-19 was a godsend to him in that regard. Now the genocide in Gaza is being used instead, the resumption of which was timed for when he was due back in court, and it has therefore been kicked down the road yet again. Netanyahu's testimony in his corruption trial has been postponed due to the fresh Gaza onslaught, and you must have been born yesterday to believe that wasn't intentional. By escalating the conflict in Gaza, Netanyahu is able to dodge proceedings yet again, helping him to maintain his power and evade accountability. This is a man who is willing to sacrifice countless lives to protect his own political career, using the suffering of the Palestinian people as a shield against his legal and political challenges, and go on TV and lie to the world, and with impunity at that. That is not the behaviour of a statesman, it is the behaviour of a criminal, of a desperate and corrupt politician way past his time in power. The return of Itamar Ben Gvir to the Israeli government and the resumption of the genocide in Gaza are reminders of the urgent need for international action and the fact this is not a government that can be negotiated with in any meaningful way, not when peace is completely and utterly off the table to them, and Netanyahu most of all, keeping him out of jail as he sees it. As I've said again and again, we, the international community, cannot remain silent in the face of such blatant human rights violations and excuse-making to provide cover for it. It is essential that we all think critically past the headlines of pliant client journalists about the issues at stake and be part of the conversation about how to hold Israel accountable for its actions when so many of our leaders refuse to have such conversations. One way to do this, of course, is by supporting organisations that advocate for Palestinian rights, such as Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions and Human Rights Watch. These organisations play a crucial role in documenting Israel's crimes and mobilising global support for justice and equality. We can also challenge the narratives that justify Israel's actions in the media and in our communities and push for policies that prioritise human rights over political expediency, be that in Israel or in the UK or the US or wherever. As much as those are words we shouldn't have to be saying, that's where we are as a race. And it is inhumane to not be calling it out. Still has to be said though, few people are being fooled by Netanyahu's political stunt here, even before his broadcast and the return of Ben Gvir. Check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch to find out a little bit more about that. I also have to make a bit of a big announcement today, as I got up this morning to find that the channel has now passed the epic milestone of 100,000 subscribers. Isn't that mad? So thanks to each and every one of you who have subscribed and tune in regularly to take in a Damo rant or two, and long may it continue. Here's to the next 100,000 subscribers, and I'll hopefully therefore catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.